The day my brother announced his engagement at my father's birthday dinner, everyone cheered. I sat at the far end of the table, the one closest to the kitchen. The one where the servers accidentally bumped your chair every time they walked past. And I thought, of course they put me here. That was 3 years before I stood in conference room B on the 41st floor of my own building and watched my brother try to sell it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is not important right now. What matters is that I was 26 years old when my father first told me I thought too much. We were in his study, the one with the dark walnut shells and the smell of old leather, and I had just laid out a 12-page analysis of why Caldwell Property Group was bleeding money through 3 underperforming assets in Phoenix. He looked at the pages for about 4 seconds, then looked at me. "You know what your problem is, Nora. You overthink everything." He slid the pages back across the desk. "Let Victor handle Phoenix." Victor was my older brother. Victor had never been to Phoenix. I picked up my pages, folded them in half, and said nothing. I had learned early that saying nothing was the only currency my father respected for me. Arguing made me emotional. Agreeing made me weak. Silence at least left him nothing to push against. I drove home that night to my apartment, a 1-bedroom on the east side of town, the kind of building with a buzzer that worked only sometimes, and a radiator that knocked through the night like an impatient visitor. My father had offered to set me up in a proper place, something with a doorman, something in the right zip code. I had said no. I told him I liked being independent. The truth was, I had stopped trusting his generosity the year before, when I found out he had offered my cousin a position in the company and told him not to mention it to me because Nora doesn't need to know everything. I was the CFO at the time. My mother passed away when I was 9. My father remarried when I was 14. My stepmother, Claudette, was the kind of woman who smiled at you with every muscle in her face except her eyes. She had 2 children from her first marriage, Victor, who was 3 years older than me, and Paige, who was 2 years younger. Within 18 months of the wedding, both of them were working at Caldwell Property Group. Within 3 years, Victor had the title of COO. I had a desk in the corner of the finance department and a reputation for being difficult to work with, which, in that office, meant I asked questions that made people uncomfortable. I was 24 when I noticed the discrepancy. It was a Tuesday in March, and I was reconciling the quarterly reports when I found a vendor payment that didn't match any contract in our system. $47,000 to a company called Brennick Consulting. I pulled the file. There was no file. I searched the database. There was no Brennick Consulting registered anywhere in the state. I flagged it to my father. He told me the accounting team had handled it. I asked which member of the accounting team. He told me I was creating problems where there weren't any. 2 weeks later, I found another one. 62,000. Different name. Same pattern. I started keeping records. Not on the company server. On a small external drive I kept at home in a shoebox under a stack of old textbooks. I did not tell anyone. I went to work every day, sat at my corner desk, smiled at the right moments, and quietly documented everything I found. This went on for 14 months. By the end of that 14 months, I had records of just over $900,000 moved through shell vendors back to a personal account I could not definitively trace, but strongly suspected. I also had something else. I had spent those 14 months building, in the evenings and on weekends, what I told people was a freelance consulting practice. Technically that was true. What I did not mention was the size of the clients, or the fact that by month 11, I had incorporated it properly under a name no one in my family would recognize. Meridian Capital Advisors. The logo was simple. The office, for the first year, was my kitchen table. Then a shared workspace. Then a proper lease in a building 30 minutes from my father's office. Far enough that no one who knew him would walk past and see my name on the directory. I kept my job at Caldwell. I needed the access. I also needed my family to believe nothing had changed. My stepmother threw a dinner party that November. The kind she held every year, ballet parking, caterers, the women wearing things that cost more than my monthly rent. I arrived in the same black dress I had worn the previous 2 years. Paige looked at it, then looked at me, and gave me the particular smile that required no words. My father introduced me to one of his investors as my daughter from my first marriage. She's in finance. Not, she runs our finance department. Not, she's our CFO. Just, she's in finance. Like a hobby. I smiled. I said it was nice to meet him. 3 months later, I bought a 7% stake in that investor's competitor through a holding company. Not out of spite. Because it was a sound investment and I had done the analysis. But I won't pretend the timing didn't give me something quiet and private to feel good about. The real shift happened in February of the following year. My father's company had been carrying debt on a portfolio of commercial properties in 2 cities, properties that had been underperforming for years, the same ones I had flagged in my Phoenix report 3 years earlier. The debt had been restructured twice. A third restructuring was running out of options. He needed either a buyer for the distressed assets or a refinancing partner willing to take on the risk. I knew this because I was still his CFO. I also knew that a fund I had quietly assembled through Meridian was in the right position to absorb exactly that kind of distressed commercial debt, not as a favor. As a calculated acquisition, the properties were undervalued, not because they were bad properties, but because my father had mismanaged them and his team didn't have the operational depth to turn them around. I did. I structured the deal through 2 intermediary entities, so that the counterparty on his side would see a fund name, not a person. The name of the fund was Ashford Capital Group. My father had never heard of it. His lawyers ran their standard due diligence. Everything checked out, because everything was legitimate. I had been meticulous about that from the beginning. Not because I was afraid of being caught doing something wrong, but because I refused to be. The deal closed on a Thursday. My father took his team out to dinner to celebrate refinancing the debt. He sent me a text that said, "Good outcome today. Let's talk about a bonus for the team next week." I replied, "Sounds good." I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of my own building when I read it. The months that followed were careful ones. I continued at Caldwell. I watched Victor make decisions I would not have made and waited for the consequences, which arrived reliably and on schedule. A development deal in one of the acquired markets fell through because he had not read the environmental assessment. A tenant negotiation collapsed because he had promised terms he didn't have the authority to offer. Each time my father smoothed it over. Each time I documented it over. Each time I documented it, what I had not anticipated was Paige. Paige was 28 and had the particular talent of people who grow up watching others work. She could identify effort without replicating it, and she used that skill to insert herself into conversations at the right moment, so that credit pooled around her naturally. I had underestimated her. That was my mistake. She came to my office one Wednesday afternoon, closed the door, and sat down. "I know about Meridian," she said. I looked at her. "I'm sorry? Your consulting company?" She said it casually, as if we were discussing the weather. "I've known for a while. I haven't told Dad." I waited. "I think we could help each other," she said. "How?" "You have something growing on the outside. I want in. Not money. Equity. 10% of Meridian. In exchange, I stay quiet and I help you from the inside. You know I have Dad's ear in ways you don't." I looked at her for a long moment. She was good. The offer was structured intelligently. The leverage was real. And she was right that she had access to my father that I had never been given. I said I would think about it. She left. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Then I called a forensic accountant I had worked with quietly for the past 6 months. I had built relationships carefully over 3 years, and those relationships were about to matter. 2 weeks after Paige's visit, Victor called a meeting. My father was there. So was the company's outside counsel. A man named Garrett who had represented Caldwell for 11 years, and who had never, in my presence, directed a question to me that he did not first direct to one of the men in the room. Victor presented a proposal to restructure my role. The language was careful. Transition. Strategic refocus. Evolving organizational needs. What it meant was they wanted me out of the CFO position. They had found someone. A man Victor had gone to business school with, to step into the role. My father said, "Nora, we think this is the right move for everyone." I looked at Garrett. He looked at the table. I said, I'd like the proposal in writing by end of week. My father said, that won't be necessary. We'll handle this as a family. I said I'd still like it in writing. I was terminated the following Friday. The severance offer was 30 days pay and a non-disparagement clause. My attorney took one look at it and said we could do better. I told her I wasn't interested in better. I was interested in what came next. What came next took 4 months to arrange. I resigned from my apartment lease and moved into a smaller place, closer to the Meridian offices, further from the part of the city where my family lived and worked and had dinner parties. I cut my spending to almost nothing. I wore the same rotation of clothes. I drove a car that had a crack in the dashboard and a heating system that worked only on the driver's side. My father's assistant saw me once getting out of it in a parking lot and mentioned it to him, and he apparently said something to Victor about how Nora was struggling. I was not struggling. I was concentrating. Meridian had, by that point, absorbed the full distressed portfolio from Caldwell through Ashford Capital. I had brought in 2 operational partners who specialized in commercial real estate turnarounds. The Phoenix properties, the ones my father had dismissed 3 years earlier with 12 pages of my analysis, were generating positive cash flow within 6 months of acquisition. The other assets followed. I did not rush. I let the work speak in the numbers, and the numbers were very clear. In the 9th month after my termination, Caldwell Property Group began to show strain. Victor's replacement for me was thorough but slow and had no appetite for the kind of risk assessment I had been doing quietly for years. 3 vendor contracts renewed on unfavorable terms, a refinancing window was missed, the operating line of credit was called in by the bank partially. My father called me once during that period. I was cooking dinner. He asked how I was doing. I said I was well. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings. I said of course not. He did not ask about my work. I did not tell him. The board meeting was scheduled for the 2nd Thursday of the month. By then I had acquired, through Ashford and 2 subsequent acquisition vehicles, just over 51% of Caldwell Property Group's outstanding debt. Not equity, debt. The mechanics of it were quiet and entirely legal, structured in the way that distressed debt acquisitions are structured when the person doing them knows exactly what they're doing and exactly why. What holding the majority of a company's debt means, in practical terms, is that you can call it, under the right conditions, with the right documentation. And with enough of it, you can compel a restructuring that puts you in a position to convert debt to equity. Which means the company that once walked you to the door on a Friday afternoon becomes, on paper and in fact, yours. I did not want to destroy my father's company. I want to be clear about that. I wanted to save it the way I had always been trying to save it, but this time on terms I set, not ones I was handed. My attorney filed the formal notice on a Monday. By Wednesday, Garrett was on the phone with her. By Thursday morning, my father was calling my cell phone. I let it ring twice, then answered. He said, "What is this?" I said. "It's a debt restructuring notice. You should have Garrett walk you through the details. He'll understand it." Silence. "The fund," he said. "Ashford." "Yes." More silence. I could hear him breathing. "That's you," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." He did not say anything for a long time. Then, "I want to meet." I said, "I'll have my attorney schedule something." The meeting was on a Friday. Conference room B, 41st floor, my building now, technically. Though the lobby directory still said Caldwell at the top and Meridian in smaller letters near the middle. My father arrived with Victor, Garrett, and Victor's business school friend whose name I had already stopped remembering. Paige was not there. I had known she wouldn't be. I arrived with my attorney and my 2 operational partners. I wore a dark suit I had bought for an investor presentation 2 years earlier, and had worn exactly once since then. Nothing expensive. Nothing dispensive. I sat down and put my hands on the table and looked at my father. He had aged in the past year. Or perhaps I was just seeing him without the filter of needing something from him. Victor started speaking almost immediately. Something about fiduciary overreach, about the ethics of the acquisition structure, about what this would do to the family. I let him finish. Then I looked at my father, not Victor. Caldwell has 3 viable options, I said. I've had my team put them in writing. The first is full restructuring under Meridian's operational management, which means the company continues, the employees stay, the brand survives. The second is a partial asset sale to cover the debt, which I don't recommend because the remaining portfolio won't support the operating cost structure. The third is dissolution. I slid 3 folders across the table. 1 to my father, 1 to Backert, 1 to Victor. I'd like to go with option 1, I said. That's not a negotiating position, it's a preference. Garrett opened his folder. Victor looked at his and then looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something between recognition and something that might, in a different person, have been respect. My father had not opened his folder. He was looking at me, really looking, the way he had not looked at me in I couldn't remember how long. The Phoenix properties, he said. Yes. That was your analysis. Yes. He put both hands flat on the table. Why didn't you just... He stopped, started again. You could have come to me. I thought about the study with the walnut shelves. The 12 pages slid back across the desk. Let Victor handle Phoenix. The dinner party. She's in finance. The dinner party. She's in finance. The Friday termination. The severance offer. 30 days. I did come to you, I said, for 6 years. He didn't answer. Garrett was reading the folder. Victor was still looking at me. I thought for a moment he was going to say something. Something genuine, something that would complicate how I felt about all of this. Instead, he closed the folder and looked at the window. My attorney laid out the term sheet. The restructuring closed 8 weeks later. Caldwell Property Group was absorbed into the Meridian portfolio as an operating subsidiary. My father retained a minority equity stake. I had structured it that way deliberately, not out of sentiment, but because he knew the long-term tenants and the local relationships in ways that still had value, and I was not in the business of wasting value. Victor transitioned out. He sent me a text 4 months later, brief and slightly formal, saying he hoped I was well. I replied that I was, and meant it. Claudette called me once. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message twice. She said she hoped we could find a way forward as a family. I did not return the call. That was not cruelty. That was a boundary, and I had earned the right to it. Paige, I saw at a property walkthrough 9 months later. She was representing a potential tenant for one of the Phoenix spaces. She didn't know it was mine when she walked in. She found out when the leasing manager introduced me. For a moment, the air between us was very still. Then she extended her hand. Congratulations, she said. I shook it. Good luck with your client. She got the lease. It was a fair deal. I don't mix business with old grievances. That's how you end up like the people who made you. I still live on the east side of town. Different apartment now. The buzzer works, the radiator doesn't knock. I still drive a car that is not remarkable. My father and I talk occasionally, mostly about the portfolio. It is a professional relationship with warmth and some of the edges. It is not the relationship I once wanted. I have made my peace with that. What I know now, that I did not know at 24 sitting at that corner desk watching someone slide my work back across a desk, is this. The people who underestimate you are not always malicious. Sometimes they are just afraid of being shown what they missed. My father was not a villain. He was a man who had decided, long before I was old enough to prove otherwise, that I would be one kind of thing. And when I became something else, he didn't have the language for it. I gave him a new vocabulary. It took longer than it should have. It cost more than it should have. It cost more than it should have. But the Phoenix properties are full, the numbers are good. And when I walk into a conference room now, no one looks past me to find the person who's really in charge. I am the person who's really in charge. I've been the person who's really in charge for a long time. They just didn't know it yet. I've thought about this a lot over the past few years, not obsessively, just honestly, the way you revisit a long road after you finally reach the end of it. And what I keep coming back to is how much of what happened was a direct consequence of choices, not fate, not luck. Choices, stacked one on top of another over years, by everyone involved, including me. My father chose for a long time to see what was convenient rather than what was true. Victor chose to take what he hadn't built and call it his. Paige chose leverage over loyalty, and I chose. Every single day in that corner office. Every night at my kitchen table with a spreadsheet open and the radiator knocking, to keep going anyway. None of those choices were without cost. That's the part people don't usually talk about. The quiet cost of doing the right thing slowly, when no one is watching and no one is applauding, and the person who should be in your corner is sliding your work back across his desk. I think about integrity differently now than I did at 24. Back then, I thought of it as a moral position, something you either had or you didn't. Now I think of it more like a structural material. The kind that doesn't show until something puts weight on it. I was meticulous. Not because anyone required it of me, but because I refused to build something I couldn't stand behind entirely. Every entity legitimate. Every entity legitimate. Every number real. That wasn't just ethics. That was intelligence. Because the moment my father's attorney opened that folder, there was nothing to question, nothing to unravel, nothing that could be used against me. I had built on solid ground for years, and when the weight finally came, nothing moved. That's what I'd want someone to take from this, if they're sitting where I was sitting. In the corner, underestimated, quietly furious, wondering if any of it is worth it. The work you do when no one is crediting you is not lost. It accumulates, it compounds. What looks like patience from the outside is often just someone who has decided to be so thorough, so prepared, so genuinely competent, that the moment of reckoning becomes inevitable rather than lucky. And the resilience. That took longer to understand. I used to think resilience meant not breaking. Now I think it means continuing to make good decisions, even when you're angry, even when you're exhausted, even when the person across the table is someone who was supposed to love you and chose not to act like it. Victor got emotional and impulsive when things went wrong. I got quieter. That distinction mattered more than any single advantage I had. I'm not holding a grudge. I'm genuinely not. My father and I talk about the portfolio now with something that resembles warmth. Victor moved on. Paige got her lease. Life continued for everyone, which is how it should be. But I didn't forgive my way to this outcome. I worked my way here. There's a difference, and I think it matters to name it. What you build in the dark when no one is watching is still real. It was always real. They just didn't know it yet.